So I'm happy to introduce as our next speaker Dr. Trevor Lane. He's Education Director and Senior Publishing Consultant at the Edens Group, and he's also an elected council member for the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE, and today he's going to be talking about COPE and research integrity. So over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to talk to you about COPE and research integrity, to provide some context, some overall context for the useful tools and technology that Crossref provides. Now, before we start, I want to see who has heard of COPE, C-O-P-E. Oh, very good. Usually in Asia, not many people have heard of it, but I think the people, please keep your hands up. The people who have their hands up are mostly from the West. So we have some work to do. COPE has some work to do to make sure we're known more in Asia. We're the main organization that upholds and promotes research integrity and publishing integrity. And so the talk will be about who we are, what we do, something on ethics, and then something on core practices, which I'll explain more about. Now, our website has our main mission, our tagline, promoting integrity in research and its publication. So this is not only the final version of record and the final research output. More and more, we have to also look at what's happening upstream and downstream. Now, our former vice chair put it quite well in this definition of publication ethics. It's a set of common rules among authors, editors, reviewers, and publishers to protect the integrity of the scientific record. Now, we could update this a little bit and say the scholarly record, the academic record, the research record. We cover also arts, humanities, and social sciences. But you'll notice that there's many parties involved: authors, editors, reviewers, and publishers. Now, even though we call it rules, they are more of a consensus. It's decided by all those stakeholders for what are the high standards and best practices to promote. And the other concept is it's a collective responsibility for those stakeholders to then protect and promote the literature's integrity, transparency, and trustworthiness. Now, this is our council at the May retreat in High Wycombe in the UK. COPE is made up of general members, more than 11,000, mostly editors and publishers, but also some associate members, publishing services, and increasingly now we're thinking about inviting institutions, research institutions, and universities, so that we do cover all stakeholders. We come from all over the world and cover all disciplines. Now, the council and trustee part are a subset, and we're volunteers, and there are a few paid staff too, and we help formulate the strategy and then put it into action. And we also come from all over the world and cover all disciplines. Now, our mission can be summarized as 3 parts. We provide support, that's education for our members, as well as resources on our website. So those are all free for members and non-members. We provide thought leadership in research integrity and ethics, and also a neutral and professional voice. Now, we aren't a legal entity, we don't enforce anything. We are a membership society, so we provide a platform for our members. So we bring together key groups in the scholarly publishing process and help them share their knowledge and ideas. So it is a community effort. Now, the resources I mentioned on our website include the core practices, flowcharts for handling alleged misconduct, best practice guidelines, some discussion documents, and our newsletter, seminars, and webinars, which then get recorded and uploaded on the website. Now, the community, our members, they bring to us problems, and they also bring to us ideas. And so we can formulate these discussion documents in consultation with them, and then the more they mature, they become best practice guidelines, and then eventually flowcharts to help people solve problems. Now, those are free resources for non-members, but for members, we also have e-learning, online, letter templates for editorial offices, a self-audit tool for journals, and a COPE forum. So I'll talk about this COPE forum, which is a member benefit, and they bring to us problems which cannot be dealt with by the usual flowcharts. So they're not everyday problems, they're more complex. We anonymize the cases, discuss them either live or online, and then other members will give their feedback and advice, and then we follow up and ask the person bringing the problem what happened, how was it resolved, and everything is written up as cases, and they are all available on this website, and there are more than 500 cases, and free to use and very useful for education. Now, some examples of COPE forum cases, and I'll put the questions here, you can look them up online later. For example, a peer reviewer notices that more than 2/3 of the data in a submitted paper have been published already, and the editors and the reviewers suspect salami publication, where you cut up results, it's the same study, the same hypothesis, but you divide your results by outcome to increase your research output. Is it salami or not? Actually, this case was a bit more complicated. Number 2, an author references her past studies in a review paper, but some of the paragraphs were self-plagiarized, copy-pasted. But when the editor contacted the institution, they said the author has done nothing wrong, they already cited themselves, so that's enough. So what happens next? And the third example, an author guesses who a reviewer was who they think rejected their paper, and they go public and name and shame this reviewer, but actually that reviewer gave a positive reply, a positive peer review report, and advised the editor to accept the paper. So the journal decided to publish that positive peer review report online in the blog, but what else should happen? So those are the types of cases that come to us, and the fellow members discuss them. Here's an overall picture of the cases over the past 20 years. So this year is COPE's 20th birthday. As you can see, recently, most cases in these areas, misconduct, peer review, conflicts of interest, have actually started to decrease. But you'll notice that authorship is a constantly common problem. And we've also noticed cases that come to us are becoming more complex. Now let's talk a bit about ethics in research publishing. We're in Singapore, so it's quite apt to talk about the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity of 2010. And this sums up the overall principles quite well. We want honesty, accountability, professional courtesy and fairness, and good stewardship of research and of research funds. Now here's a quick summary of the issues that we are concerned with. So ethics and safety, especially of human studies, patient consent, data privacy and security, and trial registration. Something called FFP, which is known for the name for the main problems around the world: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And then authorship. We saw it, this is a common and frequent problem. So the main 4 criteria, the strict criteria from the ICMJE, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, are these 4 things, and authors have to fulfill all 4, or else they are named in the acknowledgements instead. Conflicts of interest include the funding source and any reason that work might be biased, and some journals ask authors to declare that they did have access to all the data. And then ethics of submission, that authors should only submit to one journal at a time, they can't republish the same paper, they must disclose prior presentation, the journal should have access to the raw data, if authors recommend reviewers or reviewers to exclude, they have to be truthful about that, and also responsible publicity, and follow national and international codes of conduct and laws. Now, peer reviewers are really important in the whole process. They really are the foundation of the integrity of journals and articles. So they aren't the police. We can't rely on them to look for everything, but we do ask them to tell editors and journals if they notice salami slicing, cherry picking. They think the authors only are presenting the positive results, and fishing expeditions or hypothesizing after the results are known, or HARC. Now, before I mentioned FFP as the major problems, but there's lots of minor problems which together also add up to be quite serious, and these are known as questionable research practices, or QRPs. So this includes incomplete reporting, we want work to be reproducible, misleading data analyses, omitting findings, and misleading conclusions, and other things such as citation bias, missing ethics statements, no registration of trials, and if the journal asks for it, you need to make your data publicly available. So because peer review is important, we've revised our peer review ethics guidelines recently, and we've also produced an infographic to help journals recognize some signs of peer review manipulation. So again, this is on our website, publicationethics.org. Now, the last part is about core practices, and we have 10 of them. We might add to them in the future, but actually, these replace the codes of conduct. So this is a major step we've decided to take, and these were revealed at our November COPE Council retreat, again in High Wycombe. So we did have codes of conduct for publishers and editor members, but we found that these were too much like a quasi-legal rule book, and they didn't cover everything. Some were too specific, some were too long. So instead, we've got these 10 core practices. So these are the overarching principles that we expect members to abide by, and we want them to produce their own codes of practices because it's going to be different for different disciplines and different for different member types. So these are on our website now, and when you click on each one, you'll find what each principle is about. And we also hope these cover non-members too. So these are general practices we expect all stakeholders to abide by. So let's have a quick look. The first one, allegations of misconduct. Journals should have a clearly described process for handling allegations, and journals must take seriously allegations of misconduct both before and after publication, and policies should include how to handle allegations from whistleblowers. Number 2, authorship and contributorship. We need clear policies for authorship and contributorship, as well as processes for managing potential disputes. Number 3, complaints and appeals. Journals should have a clearly described process for handling complaints against the journal, its staff, editorial board, or publisher. For conflicts of interest, there should be clear definitions and processes for handling conflicts of interest for all stakeholders, again, before and after publication. Number 5, data and reproducibility. Journals should include policies on data availability and encourage the use of reporting guidelines, such as the ones on the Equator Network website, and registration of clinical trials and other study designs according to standard practice in their discipline. Traditionally, it's prospective clinical trials, but now some journals, some publishers, some countries are encouraging also observational studies to be registered. Number 6, ethical oversight should include, but is not limited to, policies on consent to publication, publication on vulnerable populations, ethical conduct of research using animals and humans, and handling confidential data and business marketing practices. Number 7, IP. All policies, including copyright and publishing licenses, should be clearly described, and all costs should be transparent. Policies should be clear on what counts as pre-publication that will preclude consideration, and what constitutes plagiarism and redundant or overlapping publication should also be specified. For journal management, we need a well-described and implemented infrastructure, including the business model, policies, processes, and software for efficient running of an editorially independent journal, as well as the efficient management and training of editorial boards and staff. For peer review, all peer review processes must be transparently described and well managed. Journals should provide training and have policies on diverse aspects, especially with respect to adoption of appropriate models of review and processes for handling conflicts of interest, appeals, and disputes that may arise in peer review. And finally, number 10, post-publication discussions and corrections. These should be allowed. There should be some mechanism for correcting, revising, or retracting articles after publication. So if you go to our website, you'll see that we've also reorganized all our resources. So this hopefully will make it more useful for users to find the different types of resources. For example, under allegations of misconduct, there's relevant cases, flowcharts, discussion documents, seminars, guidelines, and events. And the ones shown are the most recent ones, and then the archive is in the link below each section. So please have a look at our website and these new 10 core practices. Let us know what you think, give us your feedback, and hopefully this will help encourage publishers and journals to think more about their own codes of practice rather than just follow our rules, because we depend on our members to govern themselves. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm happy to answer any questions right now.
Thanks for your talk. I should declare a conflict of interest because all our editors from Elsevier are a member of COPE.
Sure.
I say this tongue-in-cheek. So my question to you is, are there areas in your view where COPE should develop insights and guidance away from, or in addition, I should say, from the existing expertise? And perhaps I'm referring to maybe some of the new challenges, like, for instance, political pressure on removing authors from existing journals. Or another area which comes to mind is actually appeal mechanisms. We have authors writing to us that they make a comparison that if you commit a crime somewhere in regions, then after 10 years or 20 years or so, you get, how do you call that? You get, waived from your sentence. And in science, that doesn't exist, they say to us. So, but more in general, what are sort of areas you want to develop COPE beyond the here and now?
Okay, thank you for your question. Yes, we're always evolving, and there's always more complex issues that get brought to us, and that's why it's useful that we do have the forum. We invite our members to give us their ideas and to tell us what's happening, and also we are very active in finding out what's happening, for example. So things that are coming up right now on the technology side would be the increase of the popularity of preprints in the life sciences and medicine. So this didn't happen before, and it has its own problems, or problems we haven't thought about, or problems that will come up that we need a group effort to solve. For example, what is prior publication? What happens if a paper gets retracted later on? There's still a preprint that exists, which was the early version. So we have invited members to talk about this. There was a discussion about this last month, or a few months ago at our online forum, and then the usual thing is to then make a discussion document, distribute it for consultation, for more feedback, and develop it that way. So members do bring issues to us. Specific cases, would be more legal things, for example, threats given to authors, what happens then if there's death threats for authors. For disciplines, we are looking more into the arts, humanities, and social sciences because we seem to have neglected them. And for guidelines for them, it's not enough just to change the words from science to arts. So we need to use a different language. We need to look at what issues are important for those disciplines. So yeah, many new issues are coming to light, and then we try to solve them together. So thank you for your question. Yes, please.
Hi. I love what COPE does. This is just a request that I've been asking COPE for 2 years to revise the guidelines on. And it comes to methods sections in research papers. When you are duplicating the exact same work and you're trying to report exactly what you've done, authors frequently run into issues that the protocol that they've used, the method, is exactly the same as in their own previous paper or somebody else's paper, and they want to report exactly what they've done, but it gets flagged as plagiarism. And COPE does not have clear guidelines on this. They've been promising to revisit it. And particularly as we're in Asia right now, this is a huge problem for a lot of labs in China because everything runs through plagiarism detection software. Once the editors see it gets flagged, and it comes from Beijing Genomic Institute, they constantly run into this. And it would be wonderful to issue really clear guidelines that if this is the work that you've done, you should report exactly what you've done, and it's not plagiarism.
Okay,
For the
thank you.
method sections.
Yes.
Just a pet peeve that I've been asking COPE to look into, but it is in Asia a big problem.
That's a good point, and I'll relay your message back to the team. We know that it depends on different disciplines, and we collaborated with BMC to issue some guidelines on what is recycling. So sometimes it depends on the discipline, sometimes it depends on the journal, and I think we should make it more obvious that journals themselves should have very clear guidelines, each journal. So they have to spell out if it's allowed or not. And I know later on there's a talk about how to decipher the scores from plagiarism checking. So that's really important. You don't just look at the percentage score. So some journals do allow it, and some journals allow a certain percentage. But this is specifically the methods section. So there is more leeway for the methods because sometimes you try to change a little bit just to avoid copy pasting, but then you've changed the method. So yes, there is more leeway in that section. Of course, we don't want to see plagiarism in the other sections. It's common maybe in bits in the introduction discussion, but definitely not allowed in the results. Thank you very much for your comment.
I was just wanted to ask about COPE membership itself. Jeffrey mentioned before about, there's been recent discussion about sort of predatory journals and there being a range of different issues there, right? Which could be just capabilities and that. But I'm just wondering in terms of organizations joining COPE, because obviously you're not certifying what publishers are doing to a certain extent. So I'm just wondering what the issues are for a relatively small organization and sort of how you handle membership review when journals or publishers are joining.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good point, and we've thought about this carefully. I'm also on the membership subcommittee, and we've also realized that because you'll know that the Beals list was taken down, and people have asked us, can you do a blacklist? Can you help us? And we've decided not to go that approach and produce blacklists, but we also realize that we're a kind of a white list. So we now have a sanctions policy which is being formulated for regular review, or when people bring complaints to us. And for new members, we have a very long algorithm checklist of things to look for. and we will apply this to both publisher members and journal members. We really look through their websites and all their guidelines and even sample papers very, very carefully. But we've decided not to, for example, make public the companies or publishers or journals that we don't accept as members. So we don't want to have a kind of blacklist of these people we've rejected. We keep the procedure confidential, but also we don't want to mix, as you said, these society journals or the small publishers that are sincerely trying their best to publish good work, but they're just learning, or they don't quite know the international trends yet, so they make little mistakes and slip-ups in their procedures, which I said we try to support our members, so we also try to support the non-members, the people that we reject. We give them a detailed list of things to improve, and then we give them a year to improve their procedures, and then they can apply again. So thank you for your question. There is also a kind of a workshop with me later on. I don't know what that is, but I'll find out in the break. So please find me later on as well. Thank you.
I'll explain that. Any last questions? One more, yes.
So I noticed in the ethical concerns you had fishing expeditions up there.
Mm-hmm.
Does this mean that COPE sort of considers descriptive science as opposed to hypothesis-driven science an ethical concern, or what's the deal there?
Oh, thanks for your point. Yeah, that was just a quick checklist to show QRPs, questionable research practices. We don't just look for FFP, the major things. So I need to explain that the fishing expeditions, or HARC, hypothesizing after the research results are known, is of course for quantitative data. For qualitative data used in not just social sciences, but many other disciplines, of course it's a different philosophy for the use of data. So of course in that case, you do collect your interview or discourse data, and then you do hypothesize and theorize afterwards. So different disciplines. I should have clarified that. Thank you.